Which one is it? Thanks, Lynette. Is that better, everybody?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, well, I might just start, even though there are still some people coming in. Thank you so much. It's a great roll-up. Thanks for coming out on a precious weekend day in this beautiful weather to this great venue. I was just saying to my team before, last time I was here, because I'm a grandma of Toowong State School students, it was at the school disco. So I hope we have as much fun today as we, if it gets a bit boring, maybe we'll put some tunes on and just have a party. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge, and these slides need to change. Can someone do that for me? First, shoot.
Frozen.
There we go. I'm just going to click this. Cool. There's me. I'll go through to me, and I'll go through this. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the stolen and unceded land of the Yagara and Turrbal people. And I acknowledge the really deep wounds to their lands and their cultures as we meet here in important meeting places and pathways, traditional pathways and meeting places. And I think as we're talking about sustainable development today, cognizant of the environment, cognizant of the past and cognizant of the future, I think we need to consider good development can actually be part of the healing process that we really need, the healing of those wounds, rather than making those wounds deeper. So I think that's a really good thought to actually kind of carry with us as we chat about this today. So development, what is it for, and what is actually good development? The dictionary says it's a process of growth or changing from one condition to another. So that's development. But for the purposes of our conversations today, I want to take it as the purposeful design and making of places. You know, the planning, the design, the building of the infrastructure that we all share in our shared lives. And that infrastructure I always think of as a kind of interactive ecosystem. And it's made up of components, built, natural, and all of the connections between them, which is like the transport element of it in our cities. So good development, I think, is the good design of these components and their relationships in a healthy relationship. So that was a bit of a teaser, that shot at the beginning, because what is it? Good's going to be going to change, you know, from situation to situation. It actually depends on the context. Responding to place and time, it changes. It's going to require a balance, often of kind of conflicting and competing issues, and there may be no perfect development. You know, the idea of actually having a perfect development across every context is just not possible. It's certainly not about superficial aesthetics. It's about utility, it's about service, and it's about appropriate inhabitation. So that's why that picture's up there. It's an image of a building that some people might find superficially appealing. I happen to know that though it's swathed in green, it neither operates well environmentally, certainly not kind of culturally, nor actually provides houses for the people who actually need it there. So we've got to really be aware of that. So while those adjacent unpretty buildings in that image, you might think doesn't look great, they are actually housing the people that need to be housed. So don't be tricked by pretty greenwashing, and that happens all the time. And it's pretty tempting these days because we can make things look pretty with green all over, but it's often just green wallpaper. So when we think of development, we often just think of kind of big buildings going up, but it's a lot more than just buildings. It's an interactive sort of ecosystem for the cohabitation of humans in the environment. So as I said before, good development should make that a really healthy kind of relationship. We've certainly got some crises happening at the moment. We all know what they are: climate, cost of living, housing. We've got serious climate risks here in Brisbane, as that image on the left says. But also we've got some amazing opportunities. We've actually got the kind of Goldilocks of all climatic conditions here in the subtropical zone. And that is the zone, the only one in the global situation where humans can actually survive without artificial heating and cooling. So just keep that thought in mind when you think about what kind of development we've had here since occupation. Have we been actually taking advantage of those climatic conditions? I think not. We haven't developed our place very well. So I think good development should design to these conditions. We certainly haven't done it to date, and we're living the consequences of that at the moment. So I've just kind of set out what I think are some, it all sounds pretty motherhoody, but I'm going to dive into it a bit, principles of good development. It might sound simplistic, but good development is what does all of these things in the interest of the community, and bad development is what does all of these things in the interests of individual benefit or profits. And we've all no doubt experienced those sorts of developments, in our neighbourhoods. So instead of dwelling on the bad ones, I just want to outline some principles of good development for these conditions across all of the scales, from the city, the urban scale, right down to the intimate and personal scale, and these apply right across those scales. So the first principle, community benefit. Good development is actually for all of us, to enhance and not actually subtract from our shared lives. So we need to build good places and communities for everyday people. We need to house everyone. We need that now, obviously, and it has to be affordably. We need to have a mix of public houses. We need to maximise public parkland. We need to integrate community facilities, and we need to prioritise community above the individual while actually delivering for both. So when I write the word ground here and talk about it, in terms of, again, working across the scale, from the city scale down to the kind of personal or even site scale, what we're talking about here is locating and designing development to work with, not against, the natural topography and the natural environmental systems. Where can density go in our city? Minimising building footprints and hard pave, building smaller in area and sometimes taller, up not out. That applies also to city sprawl, is the best way to treat our places. We need to max out shared, accessible and usable space. Trees, we need to maximise green space for urban and local cooling. We've got great opportunities in our place and in our climate for really generous, deep planted, fast growing and productive planting everywhere. And clearly we don't have that everywhere, but it's an amazing opportunity we have in our climate. And it also helps to tackle the urban heat island effect. So breeze, we need to allow natural air to permeate. So we need to design our cities and our neighbourhoods and our places for that kind of porosity from the urban scale to the local scale as well. So I'm just going to talk about is the huge central garden. It's the heart and the main social space. So the amenity and the comfort of the community and the patients and the staff was prime in this. There are deep planted trees and generous gardens throughout, and natural light and ventilation wherever possible. So in terms of that ground plane stuff, notwithstanding the massive stage size and complexity of this project, the building footprint was absolutely minimised, with all the ward wings running east and west for the prime north aspect, spanning over a huge central garden, and all of the rooms for the patients and the inhabitants have mountain or ocean views. There are no blank corridors in this space. The corridor always ends in a view or a space where you can get outside and sit in the breeze. So that's just talking about those general principles that I was running through at a very large scale. And just bear with me. These are projects that I'm familiar with. And so I just want to kind of unpack these principles based on real things. So just moving into the city now. That hospital was a greenfield site. But these principles can also work in the inner urban context if we understand, design for, and employ the natural environment as a very, very important element. This is a high-rise in the centre of Brisbane, 443 Queen Street, which I designed in collaboration with my friends Woha, who are great architects from Singapore, known for their amazing sustainable public housing. I think, Michael, you're going to talk about one of their projects. It's the Kampung Admiralty project in Singapore. Yeah, so it's which is absolutely an amazing example of really sustainable and community sustainable and environmentally sustainable community project at large scale. So the planning scheme on this site actually allowed boundary to boundary, sealed podium on this site. This design tries to minimise the private footprint, and that's shown in white there, at the ground level to allow for maximum public space and connection from the city to the river. So it kind of flips what the plan was actually suggesting about blocking that off. Deep planted trees and habitable gardens are throughout, not that superficial green wallpaper that I was talking about before. It actually breathes, this building. It's naturally lit and ventilated, unair-conditioned gardens connect the houses in the sky, and rather than the kind of typical high-rise model of internalised cores surrounded by bathrooms and kitchens, this model yields actually 100% natural ventilation and light and views for all the rooms. This isn't affordable housing, obviously, but the same principles can apply. And in fact, Woha has done affordable housing in Singapore and public housing based on these principles. So what we were trying to do here is introduce these ideas to our particular city context, and we hope they will be replicated in all types of housing across the city. So we've got shallow house plans here with openings on 2, 3 and 4 sides. where we could actually be very careful if we understood the context and the climate to design much more compactly in our cities and use far less energy and resources. So I think that's actually what we need, instead of that kind of profligate waste, is modesty of size. This idea of private sufficiency, where the real luxury, as I've always said, is not about gold taps and marble. It's actually being able to breathe air, open a window, step out into a generous garden and share garden spaces. So I think that's a really important thing, again, to apply across all of the scales from the urban to the private. So in closing, I just want to quickly give you a sense of a current local case study in Ryan. We had a great public forum about this on Thursday. It's been a big week. Lots of conversations with people about good development, bad development, etc. We're helping Mitchelton locals with the tools to kind of push back against a particularly unthoughtful and damaging development. And this became a pretty interesting case study for us to apply all of those principles and see where we could get to in our review of what we thought was not a very good kind of development application, and the locals obviously felt that too. It's on an old farm site on 76 Cooya Road at Mitchelton. You can see in the image, it's right in sort of the middle ring of suburbs. The full site's actually over 28 hectares, and the developable part of it is about kind of a third of that. It backs onto bushland. In some ways, it could be a really good site for new housing, and goodness knows we need a lot of it. It's walking distance from schools, but in some ways it's not, because the nearest high-frequency public transport stop is over 20 minutes walk away. So that's not ideal either. So we have to be very, very careful about where we decide to put density. It needs to be supported by all of the other systems in the city. And that's an interesting study in Ryan. We've got a lot of places like this across Ryan. It's quite different from the dense inner urban areas. We have to think about it in a different way. So I think real investment in public transport should absolutely be a condition of development like this. So what's wrong with the existing development application? These review studies show that the proposed subdivision design, which is the really most basic old-fashioned, crude, hack it up, like chocolate bar type of arrangement, has absolutely no regard for the natural site features. It's just carves it up. It doesn't actually relate to the topography. It doesn't relate to the climate, and that yields very bad results for this development. So the plan on the left shows the current overland flow on the site, with the proposed kind of pretty terrible detention basin that they've proposed on the site superimposed on it. So the proposed design actually redirects all of the stormwater around those proposed residential lots. What that means is it requires cut and fill right across the site. So the stormwater has to kind of deal with this mad situation because of the slope, and they're superimposing this kind of grid pattern over the top of it. You end up with most of the site actually cut and fill with retaining walls, which is absolutely mad. It's a crazy engineering, impractical solution. It's also very expensive. Retaining walls right across the site. The existing farmhouse goes, you can see in that middle image. So the middle image is actually showing the amount of cut and fill right across the site that this arrangement, this insensitive arrangement actually mandates. The plan on the right actually shows what it's like if you actually put houses on that site. So you can clearly see with that arrangement, because it's badly designed, that the houses are crammed up against each other. They're looking into each other. There's not privacy, there's not really good, kind of climatic aspect to it. So again, just a very poor kind of site arrangement design mandates a very poor experience and overuse of energy. So it's just really, so it was really good to sort of chat with this, through this with the Mitchelton people the other evening, because it sort of gave them an insight, I think, and some tools with which to actually review the sorts of things that are put in front of us so often. And so often we're kind of being sold a pup, pretty bad design. And unless you've got this kind of idea of what the principles of good design are, it's hard to tell why it's bad. So that was the great conversation we had at Mitchelton the other night. So the plan on the right also shows those houses. planting, shade and green spaces, and absolutely minimal community space. So we had a look at, okay, if you were designing a site like this based on those principles we've been talking about, what would you actually do? What would be better sort of site strategies for this to respond to those natural conditions and yield a much better result for the community? They're just, these plans just kind of graphically represent a sort of a detailed analysis that way, showing strategies that do respond to it, that sort of work with the natural site and the climatic conditions and could yield a much better outcome. And they're all based on those sustainability principles that I was just going through before. So in terms of stormwater and overland flow, it'd be far better, less engineered, less expensive solution to work with where water actually wants to go. So you could capture it upstream, direct it along those natural contours to a sort of a chain of ponds arrangement. You can see that in blue there. The flow could therefore be slowed, captured on the way, cleansed, creating great wildlife habitats, cooling and very attractive environments for active and passive enjoyment for people as well as the wildlife, obviously. Another ideal way to work with the site is actually work with the contours is to terrace it. So this yields sort of continuous housing platforms, and that sets up the street arrangement there, running east-west. And they allow, to distribute that water and minimise that retaining. All you need is batter banks, and a sectional diagram I'm going to show in a minute will actually explain that. So it's much better for passive design, capturing the breezes, catching the winter sun, screening the summer sun, so therefore, again, minimising energy use. So these three plans are actually showing different yields you could get on the site with that strategy. So this plan on the left shows that it's exactly the same number of houses that the DA proposed. The middle one is actually showing fewer houses, so you can get much more green space there. But the one on the right is significant. You could really increase the density of that site if you actually arranged it properly, and we could actually, those conjoined terrace or infill designs that I was talking about before, the row house, would be ideal for a site like that. That's probably something that the people in Mitchelton aren't necessarily, thinking about. A lot of those people there don't want anything. But we've given them the tools and had the conversation about, okay, if something's going to go there, you can insist on it being a lot better and being something that, as I said, adds to the community benefit rather than subtracts from it. Of course, you can also see on those right-hand slides, you've got this opportunity for these fingers of green and deep planting, shaded avenues, cooling, leading through to the green part of the site. And if you have a generous green parkland there, it could actually be fantastic for all. What we do about it in the community, but what we're doing in supporting the community to review and assess if they wish object to developments at places like Kuya Road. It's not that we don't want development. I mean, we're often accused of just wanting to kibosh everything. It's not that we don't want development, and I hope that's pretty clear from the examples that I've shown today. We're in favour of development. We just want it to be good development for everyone that doesn't just benefit the few, but actually benefits the whole community. And I do believe that if you apply these sorts of principles, you can be very clever and careful and purposeful about how you do that and design really good development to benefit the whole community. So I do think we deserve better than the profit-driven, unsustainable development that we so often get. Thanks, Michael. It's nice and breezy here. Good cross-ventilation here. Excellent. So just as the big developers actually sort of put in ambit claims of what they want to see on a site, you know, that kind of, we all know about this. For instance, they say, we need to build this building 12 stories above what the neighbourhood plan says. Planners finally kind of get the guts and are allowed to say, no, we're not going to take that. But they might scabble it back to 8 stories above the allowable kind of envelope in a thing. I mean, that's just, so I think we've got to learn from that strategy. We should be putting in our ambit claims and say, we actually want some decent development here, thanks very much. So to do that, I think we need to have a very clear idea of what that is and what we think good development can actually achieve for all of us, for the community, not just private individuals or the profit for developers. And I think to do that, it's really good to be armed with the knowledge and the understanding of how our city should work, how our climate works, how our natural systems work, and demand better for everyone. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass on to Michael now.
Thanks, Libby, and thanks everyone for being here. This is really a very impressive turnout. I'm so grateful to everyone who's taken the time out of their weekend to show up. I'm going to begin as well by acknowledging that we're here on stolen country. This is the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and recommit to working with future leaders as we walk down what will be a very difficult path, a very complex path as a society towards treaties and a genuine recognition of sovereignty along the way. I think that the recognition that we're all living and working on stolen land is particularly important when we're having these sorts of conversations about what should happen on this land. We know that it was stolen from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be brought into a capitalist system, newly emerging capitalist systems, and that has involved the relentless commodification of land along the way. So these are all really important ways to frame this conversation, and also bearing in mind that the context for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as they're struggling not just for recognition of sovereignty, such basic, real fundamentals as, sustainable, affordable housing for those communities. Homelessness and housing stress is the worst amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, amongst the worst in the world. So, the struggle for housing justice really is tied very closely to these sorts of issues. Now, before I got this gig, some of you might know my background. I did a bit of work for a while as a lawyer at the EDO, but before that, even many moons ago, I worked for a very, very short time as a planning lawyer in a top-tier firm. So I got to work for all the evil developers for a little stint before running away. I don't know, too blunt, maybe. Last term, I was the party spokesperson for housing as well as for planning and development. So I guess I've had a few different views of this, and that's the kind of perspective that I bring to this. Hopefully, it's useful to have spent a bit of time coming at it from both ends. Now, this little contribution, we've called it Affordable and Pleasant Neighbourhoods, Why Developers Aren't Interested in Building Them. I'm trying, I suppose, to zoom out a little bit and look more at the neighbourhood scale, similar sorts of issues and focus to what Libby's spoken about previously, but just zooming out a little bit. And I'll just kind of start with the status quo. Like we are fed this idea, what I suggest is a completely false dichotomy, that we either need to go really, really tall or just accept the inevitability of endless urban sprawl, which simply isn't the case. That's not the way we need to do things. It's not the way we should do things. And I suppose I'm interested in talking a little bit about land use and this increasingly well-recognised concept of the missing middle, what medium density can look like, why we don't see that. Because I really do feel like, the conversation has started, but we've got a lot more work to do to get people used to the idea of increasing density, particularly in urban areas like the one I represent in Maywa. We've got some some already very high density suburbs in Toowong and in Rapilli, for example. But we clearly need more housing. I don't think that's really up for dispute. I guess the reality that we're trying to get across here is that medium density can be cheaper to build and better to live in, and it can be better able to cope, as Libby's already mentioned, with weather and the climate that we live in now, and also the variability that we're likely to experience in years to come. And it can, when we do the comparison at a citywide or a suburban scale, we can achieve similar densities per square kilometre to the kinds of massive high rises that we see at the moment. So if we think about what is a neighbourhood that people will want to live mixed use that does provide space for community engagement, for for basic services, retail space and commercial space, making those easier to access at the neighbourhood scale is really important. And ensuring that with densification we retain access to outdoor spaces, both in our own homes and in our neighbourhoods, because we've I think become very accustomed to the idea of the great Australian dream being the detached dwelling where you get to enjoy your own yard and everyone needs a lawnmower and a whippersnipper. That really, I don't think it will be the way of the future, especially for an area like South East Queensland where we're seeing populations increase so quickly. So I'll go to a few examples now if I can. I'll start with a local one. Now, I think a lot of people here would probably be familiar with this site, this location. Lambert Road in Indooroopilly. We've seen already quite a few new apartments go up there, and there are more to come. What we can acknowledge about this street straight up is that it's a good location. It's near the train station. It's reasonably close to Indooroopilly Shopping Centre. It's close to schools. A lot of the development that's happened there so far has been at a reasonable sort of scale, as in mid-rise developments. Not all of it has sat within the kind of envelopes that the neighbourhood plan suggests they should be constrained to, and that's a consistent problem with the planning system as it stands at the moment. So it's not all bad on Lambert Road, but the key features that are missing are that these buildings don't have, there's almost no active ground floor space. So none of that communal space that people can cohabit and really use to build community along that strip. And that's because of the way it's zoned. And most importantly, the ground floor, the street frontage and, those basements are almost completely dominated by car parking. Now, that's a really, it's a really key point, I think, that our I don't have time in this presentation to really drill down into the public transport side of things, but we need to be very aware that how we provide, the means for people to get around our city is fundamentally intertwined with what our buildings, what our street frontages, what our communities look and feel like. So the other thing about these kinds of projects to be aware of, and you can see there in that bottom picture, they stretch all the way to the rear of the blocks. There's essentially no useful outdoor space. Again, contrast that with the kinds of images and proposals that Libby's put up at that, that individual discrete project scale. yeah, look, as I said, I can't labour the point on public transport and active transport enough at this point, but I don't have time for it. I will just make the observation that active transport possibilities have really suffered along this stretch as well because of that. Using every square inch of the block, getting site coverage again that tends to go well outside what the planning scheme anticipates. It means that we don't have, this is a priority active transport corridor along Lambert Road. We don't have a bikeway there because council hasn't invested in it. They haven't taken back any of the street frontage that would make it far easier to do and make for much better pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. Let's look at a really good example. Of course, we're going to Copenhagen. This is, I guess, this kind of what we're trying to communicate here is that we can take inspiration from other cities, and this idea of enclosed courtyards it's obviously very attractive and it creates that shared space and community. But this is the kind of arrangement that really becomes possible when you have very low car usage. Now, they've done a great job in Copenhagen with these courtyards that tend to be shared. You can see some of those examples. They'll be shared between an entire block or, the residents of one, larger building. But having that, that kind of design that creates quick access to outdoor space, different kinds of outdoor space, including, private patios and shared communal space for neighbours on the same block. That's, it's a different kind of arrangement and different vision from what Libby's referred to earlier, but it kind of shares those same features of occasionally, a childcare centre, but basically it's retail space where they can get high rents. We don't tend to enjoy the benefit of other community spaces, be they, what are some examples? Libraries, health clinics, just public space, genuinely public space that we can all enjoy at any time of the day. We don't tend to get those because they aren't as easily monetized. Yeah, a couple of examples. I hope those are useful. Moving right along. I'm not moving as quickly as I probably should, so I'll keep going. We're hearing lots more these days about the NIMBYs and the YIMBYs, and is that really what this is all about? I think not. I think that's a gross oversimplification of a much more complex set of factors. There are obviously things that we can change about the way we build, which has been, I guess, much of the focus of my presentation and Libby's so far. But I really hope that we can use this as an opportunity to offer some thoughts about how we can get affordable housing, not just about what does development look like. Good and bad development. We also need to bear in mind the imperative of higher density and actually providing affordable housing for everyone. So look, I've tried to step out here loosely how I'll approach the rest of the presentation. And I guess I want to make the argument that we should be upzoning. In fact, I think we need to be upzoning to plan for pleasant neighbourhoods with good public services that also, allow for population increase. We should be clear as well that just increasing the zoning doesn't mean that more housing will get built, or let alone good housing for that matter. The reality is that the system as a whole leaves developers holding all the cards, and through a process of land banking and profit maximisation, we'll see oftentimes big delays in when housing developments might go ahead. And that we're not going to see any change. Like, property prices in Australia are going to remain high because of the financialisation, the commodification of housing, and the role that private development plays in that. Unless that is, of course, governments could step in at any point to actually shield housing as a basic, as an essential for life, rather than just treating it as a commodity. So shielding it from market prices. Market forces, indeed. All right, moving right along very quickly. I'll step through some examples of parts of the city where we do actually already have quite high density zoning, but we're just not seeing development happen. So Lutwyche, this is probably an area most of you are reasonably familiar with. So it's right near the busway. It's got excellent public transport services. It's zoned really for really extensive, really quite high density, and a lot of mixed use along the main road there, that blue strip down the middle, which would suggest that the residents of Lutwyche could be looking forward to that sort of mixed use development that we were talking about at the start, where we've got activated street fronts, where we've got all of those facilities and the supports that you need for a community right there, and housing above those. But where is it? Like, it's not happening. You drive along Lutwyche Road at the moment, it's just a dead zone there. And this is zoning happened a very long time. The upzoning happened ages ago. Similar story in Taringa. This is very generous zoning on Morrow Street in the middle of Taringa and Moggle Road. Sorry, it allows up to 10 stories in some places. There's very little multi-story development happening there. Mitchelton, I really am going to bounce through these. They're kind of all the same example in a lot of ways. This is just down the road from the Kuya Road site that Libby was talking about before. Again, it's ideally located, close to shops, close to public transport. But again, there's very little beyond just detached houses in this part of Mitchelton, where there's extraordinary potential for good medium density, medium rise development there. One more, Ipswich Road in the Gabba. Same story. Underutilised, higher zoning already there in place. John has been talking about this for a lot of years as well. We've got a lot of properties around here that are just abandoned. They're doing nothing. So again, it points directly to this land banking phenomenon, the dilemma we've got with profit